When I stepped in to protect my wife, my son held me down so my daughter-in-law could strike her. What I did next made them pay for every single humiliation. I'll never forget the feeling of my own son's hands gripping me from behind as I watched my Teresa flinch in fear. Some betrayals burn the soul like a red-hot iron, leaving scars that not even time can erase. My name is Nathaniel Nate Sterling, and for 62 years I thought I understood how the world worked. I built a respectable fortune, raised 3 children, and believed that family respect was as solid as the concrete walls of my properties. How wrong I was. Respect, as I discovered in the most painful way, is as fragile as the finest glass, and once broken, the fragments cut deeper than any knife. That Sunday afternoon, as the setting sun bathed our house in Georgetown in light, I felt everything I believed about my family, my legacy, and my place in this world collapse. Why don't you two head on over to the restaurant? Teresa and I will be there in 20 minutes. I said this to Jared, my youngest son, and Danielle, his wife of just 2 years. It was our traditional Sunday family dinner, a custom we maintained even after my other children, Michael and Lauren, moved out of D.C. Only Jared remained close, living in one of the properties I gifted him when he got married. "No, Pop, we'd rather wait for you," Jared insisted with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Danny wants to talk to Teresa about some family recipes, right, babe?" Danielle nodded, fiddling with her long, black hair. Always perfectly styled, always concerned with the impression she made. Since she entered our lives, something about her had unsettled me. Maybe it was her calculated smile, or the way her eyes appraised every object in our home, like someone pricing merchandise. "As you wish," I replied, heading up the stairs toward our bedroom where Teresa was finishing getting ready. I found her sitting at the vanity, applying lipstick with slightly trembling hands. At 58, she was still beautiful, though the years and early arthritis had taken their toll. I paused for a moment, observing her through the mirror, a ritual so familiar after 35 years of marriage. "They're waiting for us downstairs," I said softly. Teresa nodded, but I noticed the tension in her shoulders. Lately, she always seemed tense when Danielle was around. "Everything all right, my love?" I asked, approaching her. "Yes, Nate, my hands are just aching a little today," she replied with that brave smile she always wore to downplay her condition. We went downstairs together, her leaning lightly on my arm. In the living room, Jared and Danielle were talking in low voices, stopping abruptly when they saw us. Something in their demeanor put me on alert. That instinct I developed over 20 years in the real estate business, where I learned to detect when something wasn't adding up in a negotiation. "We're ready," I announced. "Should we go in one car, or would you prefer to drive separately?" "We'll go together, Pop," Jared replied. "We can talk on the way." We headed to the garage where my black Suburban was waiting. I opened the door for Teresa and helped her into the front seat. As I started to walk toward the driver's side, Jared stopped me. "I'm driving today, Pop," he said with unusual firmness. "You always drive. Take a break." I was about to protest, but Teresa shot me a conciliatory look. She always told me I needed to let go of control, to allow our children to take more initiative. Then resigned, I sat in the back seat next to Danielle, who immediately began talking about a property they had viewed the previous weekend. "It's perfect, Mr. Sterling," she commented with that sugary tone she used when she wanted something. "But it's slightly out of our budget. Jared says maybe you could—" "Danny? Not now," Jared interrupted her, looking at her through the rearview mirror. I noticed the exchange of glances between them, a silent code I couldn't decipher. Something was off. Instead of taking the route toward the restaurant in the West End, Jared turned in the opposite direction. "You took the wrong turn, son," I pointed out. "No, we're going to the restaurant, Pop," he replied dryly. "Something important came up that we need to resolve first." A shiver ran down my spine. Teresa turned toward me, worry evident in her eyes. Before I could demand an explanation, Jared parked in front of a house I recognized immediately. It was one of my investment properties in the Brooklyn neighborhood, currently vacant between tenants. "What are we doing here?" Teresa asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We have a conversation to finish," Danielle responded, her tone completely transformed, cold as steel. Jared turned off the engine and faced us. "Mom, Pop, this is tough, but it's necessary. We've found out something we can't ignore." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, irritation growing inside me. "We're talking about this," Danielle replied, pulling documents from her purse. "Copies of the deeds to all my properties, the trusts, the overseas accounts, everything. The impact was immediate. Those documents were in my safe, some even with my attorney. No one should have access to them, much less copies." "How did you get those?" I asked, my voice dangerously controlled. "That doesn't matter," Jared cut in. "What matters is what we discovered. You've been lying to us, Pop. To all of us. Your empire is much bigger than you've led us to believe. The properties in Florida, the accounts in Switzerland, the secret trust that excludes Mom." Teresa looked at me, confused. "Rodrigo, they're old investments, legal tax strategies," I replied, maintaining my calm. "None of this is your concern right now. These are my businesses." "These are family affairs," Danielle exclaimed. "Jared is your son, your heir. He has a right to know." "My will is clear and fair to everyone," I retorted, "and it will be opened when I'm gone, not before." "That's the problem, Mr. Sterling," Danielle continued, her voice now laced with venom. "Why wait? Why keep Jared working as an employee in his own family business while you control everything?" I looked at my son, searching his eyes for something of the boy I raised. I only found ambition and resentment. "Is that what you think, Jared?" I asked. "That I'm keeping you as an employee? I've been preparing you to take the reins eventually." "Eventually," he replied bitterly. "I'm 34 years old, Pop. How much longer should I wait? Michael and Lauren received their share when they decided to follow other paths. I'm the only one who stayed, the only one who sacrificed other opportunities out of loyalty to the family business." "Loyalty?" I repeated, indignation rising in my voice. "You deceive me to bring me here, confront me with private documents obtained who knows how, and you talk about loyalty?" The tension in the car was palpable. Teresa, always the mediator, who tried to intervene. "Son, we can talk about this civilly, at home. I don't understand all of this secrecy and this ambush." "Because he never listens, Mom," Jared replied. "He always has an excuse. He always postpones important decisions. Next year, son. When you're ready, son. I'm tired of waiting." "This is your doing," I said, looking directly at Danielle. "You put these ideas in his head." Danielle smiled, a cold grin that finally revealed her true nature. "I just helped him see the truth, Mr. Sterling. That you're never going to let go of control, voluntarily. That as long as you live, Jared will always be treated like an incapable child." "Let's get out," Jared ordered, opening his door. "We're continuing this conversation inside." "I have nothing more to discuss," I responded firmly. "Take us back right now." "That's not a request, Pop," he said with a hardness I'd never heard in his voice. "We have a lot to resolve, and we'll do it now." I exchanged a look with Teresa, whose eyes reflected a mixture of confusion and fear. I decided the best thing was to play along for now, to evaluate the complete situation. In my decades of business, I learned that sometimes you have to take one step back to take two steps forward later. We entered the empty house, our footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The property, a spacious colonial I had bought as an investment 3 years ago, was fully furnished but without personal touches, ready to be shown to potential tenants. "Sit down," Jared instructed, gesturing to the living room chairs. Teresa and I sat together on a sofa while they remained standing like prosecutors before the accused. The power dynamic they were trying to establish was obvious and clumsy. "This is what's going to happen," Danielle began, surprisingly taking control of the conversation. "You are going to immediately transfer operational control of the companies to Jared. Not just a meaningless title, but real authority over the accounts, the properties, everything. We also want a redistribution of the assets," Jared continued. "Michael and Lauren received properties as an advance on their inheritance when they decided to follow other paths. I deserve the same, plus compensation for the years I worked under your supervision." I watched them, barely recognizing my own son in this ambitious, calculating man. Where was the idealistic young man who wanted to learn the business from the ground up? "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice perfectly controlled despite the rage growing inside me. Danielle pulled more documents from her purse, spreading them on the coffee table. "We have this," she said with a triumphant smile. "Evidence of certain irregularities in your transactions with city officials 15 years ago. Enough to start an investigation that will, at minimum, irreparably stain your reputation." The blow was direct. During the business expansion in the early 2000s, there had been certain facilitation payments, practices common at the time that could now be interpreted very differently. Nothing explicitly illegal, but questionable enough to cause problems. "Are you threatening your own father with blackmail?" I asked Jared, deliberately ignoring Danielle. "I prefer to call it negotiation from a position of advantage," he replied, and I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes, quickly suppressed. Teresa, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Jared, my son, this isn't you. You've always been a good boy, respectful, considerate. What happened to the values we instilled in you?" "Shut up, you stupid old woman," Danielle spat out with surprising violence. "You're part of the problem, always defending him, always justifying his obsessive control, his manipulation." I stood up immediately, fury surging through my veins like liquid fire. "Watch your words when you speak to my wife," I warned, my voice low but loaded with threat. "Or what, father-in-law?" Danielle challenged, moving closer to Teresa. "Are you going to show your true colors? The relentless businessman everyone in the real estate sector fears?" Teresa tried to stand up, but her arthritic hands failed, causing her to stagger. I grabbed her arm to steady her. "We're leaving here right now," I declared. "This conversation is over." I tried to guide Teresa toward the door, but Jared stepped in front of us. "We're not finished, Pop. Not until you sign the documents we prepared." "I will never sign anything under duress," I replied. "If you publish a single word of those supposed compromising documents, I'll sue both of you for defamation." I tried to move around Jared, but he grabbed my arm forcefully. "You're not going anywhere." What happened next was etched into my memory with brutal clarity. We wrestled briefly, my wounded pride giving me a strength that my 62 years didn't justify. Suddenly, Jared seized me from behind, immobilizing my arms while Danielle approached Teresa with a menacing expression. "Your husband needs to understand that he's no longer in control," she said, raising her hand. "Don't you dare touch her!" I roared, fighting against my son's grip. "Danny, no," Jared began, but she had already shoved Teresa, making her fall back onto the sofa. My wife, frightened and confused, tried to protect herself with her aching hands. The fear in her eyes, her vulnerability before this woman who was supposedly part of our family, ignited something primal inside me. "Let me go, Jared," I shouted, but he tightened his grip. "Calm down, Pop. No one's going to hurt her. We just need you to understand that we're serious." Danielle leaned over Teresa, whispering something I couldn't hear, but which made my wife's eyes fill with tears. It was then that something broke inside me. It wasn't just blind rage I felt, but a freezing clarity, a steely determination that instantly transformed my worldview. For decades, I had built an empire, negotiated with business sharks, overcome economic and personal crises. I had been tough when necessary, ruthless when the situation demanded it, but always with a code of honor. These two had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I stopped struggling, took a deep breath, and spoke with a calm that surprised even myself. "All right, Jared. You're right. Let's talk like adults." My sudden change of attitude disconcerted him enough that he loosened his grip. I gently freed myself, adjusted my shirt, and walked over to Teresa, helping her up. "Are you okay, my love?" I asked softly. She nodded, though I could see fear and confusion in her eyes. I helped her sit down again, this time staying by her side, protective. "Show me those documents you want me to sign," I said with a tranquility that clearly threw them off. Danielle and Jared exchanged looks of surprise and triumph. They were convinced they had won, that they had broken me. "Here they are," Danielle said, taking a folder from her purse and spreading it on the table. They were precisely drafted legal documents, property transfers, changes in the corporate structure, access to accounts, a meticulously designed plan to strip me of control over everything I had built. I reviewed them with apparent interest, nodding occasionally, asking technical questions that gave them the false impression that I was seriously considering their proposal. The entire time, my mind worked at full speed, evaluating options, recalling contacts, meticulously planning what would come next. "I'll need to make a few calls," I said finally, closing the folder. "I can't sign this just like that without consulting my attorneys." "There's no time for lawyers," Jared replied impatiently. "You need to sign now." "Son, I built this empire over 40 years. Don't expect me to hand it over in 40 minutes, I replied, keeping my tone reasonable. "Give me 48 hours, just that." "Why? To hide assets? To prepare countermeasures?" Danielle cut in suspicious. "To do things correctly," I replied firmly. "If you truly want a transition that benefits everyone and doesn't end in endless legal battles, I need time to structure it properly." I saw the doubt in Jared's eyes. He had always been more insecure than he let on, always seeking my approval, even when rebelling against my authority. 24 hours, he finally conceded. Not a minute more. "Fine," I agreed, standing up and helping Teresa to her feet. "And now, if you don't mind, my wife needs to rest. It's been a revealing afternoon." "We'll take you home," Jared said, grabbing the keys. The drive back took place in a tense silence. Teresa squeezed my hand, seeking reassurance. I looked out the window, seemingly thoughtful, but in reality, mentally cataloging every step I would take once we arrived home. When they finally dropped us off at the entrance of our residence, Danielle couldn't resist a final comment. 24 hours, Mr. Sterling, or those compromising documents will reach very interested parties." I nodded curtly, helping Teresa out of the vehicle. We watched them drive away, the roar of the engine fading in the distance. "Nate, what are we going to do?" Teresa asked, her voice trembling, once we stepped inside. I looked into her eyes, those same eyes that had looked at me with love for over 3 decades, now clouded by fear and betrayal. I took her hands gently, conscious of the pain caused by her arthritis. "Don't worry, my love," I replied, with a calm that came from absolute certainty. "They think they have us cornered, but they've made a fatal mistake." "Which one?" she asked, confused. "They underestimated me," I replied simply. "And worse yet, they hurt you." That's something I will never forgive. I headed to my study, closing the door behind me. I turned on my computer and started making calls. First to Hector Johnson, my trusted attorney of 20 years. Then to Sebastian Hayes, my financial advisor. Then to several strategic contacts at banks, public registries, and regulatory authorities. Each call was a move on the chessboard that had formed. Every instruction, a step toward the trap I was setting. I wasn't acting out of blind rage, but from that freezing clarity that only appears when all illusions have vanished. I worked for hours, ignoring the fatigue, fueled by an unbreakable determination. Teresa brought me coffee and stayed by my side in silence, offering her support without words. It had always been this way, my rock, my anchor, the moral compass that kept me centered when the business world threatened to harden me too much. Near midnight, when I finally completed my initial preparations, I leaned back in my armchair, exhausted but satisfied. Teresa, who had fallen asleep on the sofa in my study, woke up and looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I will be," I replied, taking her hand. "And you will be too, I promise." "I don't want you to hurt Jared," she said, her eyes pleading. "Despite everything, he's still our son." "I won't hurt him physically," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "But he must learn that actions have consequences. What he did today, allowing you to be disrespected, to be intimidated, that is unforgivable." Teresa fell silent, torn between her maternal instinct to protect her son and the undeniable betrayal she had experienced today. "Do you remember what we always told the kids when they were little?" I asked after a moment. "That respect isn't demanded, it's earned. But once lost, it's almost impossible to recover." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jared has made his choice," I continued. "Now he must live with the consequences, and I'll make sure he learns the most important lesson I never taught him properly." "What is that?" she whispered. "That you never, ever betray those who have given everything for you," I replied, my voice firm but charged with emotion. "And that in this world, respect is the only currency that truly matters." I stood up and helped her to her feet. Together, we went up to our bedroom. While she prepared for sleep, I remained by the window, looking at the city lights spreading out like a mantle of earthly stars. "Nate," Teresa called from the bed, "what's going to happen tomorrow?" I turned to her, the woman who had been by my side every step of the way, in every triumph and every fall. "Tomorrow, my love, the real game begins," I replied. "And I promise you that when it ends, they will know exactly what it means to have underestimated me." As I lay down beside her, my mind continued strategizing, refining plans, anticipating moves. Because if I had learned anything in my decades in the real estate world, it was that revenge, like a good investment, must be carefully planned, executed with precision, and, above all, served cold. And I fully intended to serve a dish they would never forget. Dawn found me already awake, reviewing documents in my study. I had slept barely 3 hours, but the adrenaline and determination kept my mind clear. Teresa brought me coffee and a light breakfast that I barely touched. "You should eat something," she scolded softly. "I will later," I promised, without looking up from my computer. "I need to finish this first." "Can I help you with anything?" she offered, sitting across from me. I looked at her then, appreciating her quiet strength. Despite everything that had happened, she maintained her dignity. As a matter of fact, yes, I replied. I need you to call Michael and Lauren. Tell them it's urgent, but don't go into details over the phone. I need to talk to them as soon as possible, preferably today, via video conference. Teresa nodded and got up to make the calls. My other two children had taken paths different from the family business. Michael, 38, was a surgeon in Seattle, while Lauren, 36, ran an NGO in Atlanta. Both had received properties as part of their early inheritance when they decided to follow their own careers, an arrangement I always considered fair. Mid-morning, I received the first call from Jared. "How are you doing with those documents, Pop?" he asked, without even a greeting. "Working on them," I replied neutrally. "As I told you, these things take time if you want to do them correctly. Remember, you only have until tonight," he warned. "Danielle is getting impatient." "I can imagine," I commented, allowing a slight sarcastic tone to filter into my voice. "Tell her that patience is a virtue, especially in business." "You're not in a position to lecture, Pop," he replied, irritated. "All we have are the proofs that can sink you. And I have 62 years of experience that tell me threats rarely lead to good deals," I countered. "But don't worry, you'll have your answer tonight." I hung up before he could respond, a small but satisfying affirmation of control that I knew would infuriate him. At 2 in the afternoon, I managed to coordinate a video conference with Michael and Lauren. I explained the situation without holding back, watching their expressions shift from surprise to indignation. "Jared did what?" Lauren, always the most passionate, exclaimed. "He allowed that woman to intimidate Mom? That's unbelievable." "There has to be more to this story," Michael reflected, always more analytical. "Jared was always ambitious, but never dishonest or aggressive. How long has he been acting like this?" "Since he married Danielle," Teresa replied softly. "He changed gradually, distancing himself from us, questioning every decision his father made, becoming increasingly resentful. I detailed my plan to them, explaining the role I needed them to play. At first they hesitated, worried about the consequences for Jared. But when I showed them the photos of Teresa's bruised wrists, the result of the previous day's struggle, their determination solidified. "Count me in, Pop," Michael said, his voice heavy with resolve. "No one hurts Mom like that." "And me too," added Lauren. "Jared needs to learn a lesson, and it looks like the time has come." I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing arrangements, signing documents prepared by Hector, my attorney, and making strategic calls. At 7 o'clock, I received another call from Jared. This time, his tone was more aggressive. "Time's up, Pop. We're coming to pick up the signed documents in an hour." "I prefer we meet at a neutral location," I replied calmly. "How about at the Sterling Group offices at 9 o'clock? That way, we can formalize everything properly." There was a moment of hesitation. Then I heard Danielle whispering something in the background. "Fine," he finally agreed. At 9 sharp, the Sterling Real Estate Group headquarters, which occupied 3 floors in a sleek downtown skyscraper, was prepared for the scenario. At 8:30, I was already there, setting the stage for what was to come. Teresa had insisted on joining me despite my reservations. "We're in this together, Nate," she had said firmly, "just like we've always been." Hector Johnson arrived shortly after, along with 2 notaries and my chief financial officer. At 9 o'clock exactly, the security guard announced the arrival of Jared and Danielle. I had them brought into the main boardroom, an imposing space with panoramic windows offering a view of the illuminated city. Teresa and I waited for them, seated at the head of the large mahogany table with Hector and the other professionals at our side. Jared entered first, suited and with a confident expression. Danielle followed. Elegantly dressed, and wearing a look of anticipation that churned my stomach. Their surprise was evident when they saw so many people present. "What is this, Pop?" Jared asked, suspicious. "You said it would be a private meeting." "I said we would formalize everything properly," I corrected. "And for that, we need witnesses and competent authorities. Please, take a seat." They exchanged uncertain glances before sitting across from us. "Did you sign the documents?" Danielle asked, getting straight to the point. "Not exactly," I replied. "I prepared some of my own. I think you'll find them interesting." I gestured to Hector, who slid a folder toward them. Jared opened it cautiously, starting to read. I watched his expression change from confusion to shock, and finally, to panic. "What does this mean?" he demanded, his voice slightly cracking. "It means, my son, that you have made the gravest mistake of your life," I replied, with glacial calm. "And now you will face the consequences." The silence that followed my words was absolute. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant honk of a car on the streets of downtown, even the accelerated rhythm of Jared's breathing as his eyes frantically scanned the documents in front of him. This can't be legal," he finally stammered, looking up with a mixture of disbelief and fear. "I assure you that every line of those documents has been meticulously reviewed by the best legal team in the country," I replied, gesturing toward Hector and the notaries. "Unlike your documents, which were clearly prepared by someone with more ambition than legal knowledge." Danielle snatched the folder from Jared's hands and began reviewing the content, her mask of sophistication crumbling as she grasped the magnitude of what she was reading. "Allow me to explain what you have before you," I continued, my voice serene but relentless. "First, a complete restructuring of the Sterling Real Estate Group, effective exactly 6 hours ago. The company you knew, my son, no longer exists in the form you believed." "What have you done?" Jared asked, visibly paling. "I have divided the assets into 5 different entities with independent corporate structures. The one you know, where you've been working, now represents barely 15% of the group's total value." "You can't do that overnight," Danielle protested, her voice losing that defiant confidence. "There are procedures, transition periods. When you are the sole owner and CEO, and you have the best legal team at your disposal, it's surprising how quickly the corporate gears can turn," I replied, allowing myself a slight smile. "Especially when you've been planning an eventual restructuring for months and only needed the right incentive to implement it." I saw the surprise on their faces. They had clearly assumed their ambush had caught me completely off guard. "The second document," I continued, "is a formal notification of your immediate dismissal from all executive positions in any of my companies." "You can't fire me," Jared exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. "I'm your son, your heir." "Correction, you were my employee, and like any employee who conspires against the company, you have been fired for just cause. As for being my heir, that brings us to the third document." Teresa lightly squeezed my hand under the table. She knew what was coming would be the hardest blow, but also the most necessary. "A complete modification of my will, certified today by these notaries, in which you are officially disinherited." The color completely drained from Jared's face. For years, the promise of the Sterling Empire had been the center of his existence, the justification for every decision made. "You can't do this," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "Not only can I, it's already done," I replied. "My assets will be divided between Michael and Lauren, with a substantial portion dedicated to a foundation in your mother's name. You will receive exactly what they received when they decided to follow their own paths: one property and a fixed sum so you can start over away from my sight." "That's unfair," Danielle interjected, recovering some of her boldness. "Michael and then Lauren abandoned the family business, while Jared dedicated years to working for you." "Unfair?" I repeated, feeling my controlled indignation begin to filter into my voice. "You talk to me about justice after what you did yesterday? After allowing you to intimidate and assault Teresa right before your own eyes?" I directed my gaze straight at Jared, pinning him down like a scalpel. "You held me down so she could threaten your mother, the woman who gave you life, who spent sleepless nights when you were sick, who defended every one of your screw-ups, even when I wanted to be stricter. And you talk about injustice?" I saw a flash of shame cross his face, quickly suppressed by indignation. "It was just a moment of tension," he defended weakly. "Danielle never intended to actually hurt Mom. I have bruises on my wrists, Jared, and they're not from the tension of the moment," Teresa said, speaking then with a softness that contrasted with the harshness of her words. "They're from the force with which your wife grabbed me while you restrained your father." To give emphasis to her words, Teresa lifted her hands, revealing the purple and yellowish tones that marked her delicate skin. In the boardroom, illuminated by artificial light, those marks seemed to scream the betrayal she had been victim of. "That was an accident," Danielle interjected, but even she seemed to recognize the weakness of her argument. "The fourth document," I continued, deliberately ignoring her comment, "it details the legal actions we are taking against you, Danielle. For physical assault, we have the forensic photographs, Teresa's testimony, and by tomorrow the medical report confirming the damage causes." "It's ridiculous," she exclaimed. "It was barely a struggle against a 58-year-old woman with diagnosed arthritis," I completed. "Courts have a particular sensitivity toward violence against seniors and people with medical conditions. Your lawyer will explain it to you, I'm sure." "This is disproportionate revenge," Jared protested, regaining some composure. "You're destroying my life for a lapse in judgment." "No, son. I am responding to a betrayal with appropriate consequences. And I'm not done yet." I gestured to Hector, who pulled another document from his briefcase and slid it toward the couple. "The fifth document is a formal notice to vacate the property in Kalorama, where you currently reside. As you recall, that house is still in my name. Part of your executive compensation included the right to live there, a right that naturally ends with your employment." "You're kicking us out into the street?" Jared asked, the disbelief evident in his voice. "You have 72 hours to collect your personal belongings. Everything that is part of the property, furniture, appliances, installed systems, remains with the property." Danielle began to protest, but I raised a hand, silencing her. "And finally, regarding those supposed compromising documents you tried to blackmail me with," I pressed a button on the table's intercom. "You may come in now," I instructed. The boardroom doors opened, revealing two suited men they didn't immediately recognize. "I present to you Agents Rodriguez and Chavez from the Financial Intelligence Unit," I announced calmly. "I have provided them with copies of all the documents you showed me yesterday, along with recordings of your blackmail threats." Panic flooded the faces of Jared and Danielle. "The documents you showed me, curiously, contained information that was falsified. Yes, some transactions from 15 years ago were complex, but they were all within the legal framework in effect at the time. What you showed me were altered versions with modified figures and dates to make them appear irregular." "We didn't alter anything," Jared quickly defended. "We obtained them that way." "Which leads me to wonder where exactly you obtained those documents," I inquired, "because according to preliminary analysis, they appear to have been stolen from my private archives and subsequently altered. Both actions constitute serious felonies." The agents approached the table, their expressions professionally neutral, but their eyes carefully evaluating the couple in front of them. "Mr. Sterling," one of them said, addressing Jared, "we need you to accompany us to take your statement regarding the origin of these documents and the circumstances under which they were obtained." "No, I don't understand," Jared stammered, visibly distraught. "Pop, what have you done?" "I've done exactly what my parents taught me, Jared. Defend my family against those who seek to harm it, even if that threat comes from within." I stood up, indicating that the meeting had concluded for me. Teresa did the same, her hand seeking support on my arm. One last thing," I added, stopping at the door. "Michael and Lauren will arrive tomorrow. They wanted to be present for the final phase of this family readjustment." "Final phase?" Danielle asked, fear evident in her voice. "What more can you do to us?" "Oh, it's nothing we're going to do to you," I replied, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's simply that my other children insisted on being present when the official statement about the Sterling Group's restructuring and your separation from it is publicly read. I imagine the press will be very interested, especially those journalists specializing in family businesses who have followed our trajectory for decades." The final blow was served: public humiliation, professional discredit, the indelible stain on their reputation. In the American business world, where relationships and trust are everything, Jared had just become a pariah. "Don't do this to me," he pleaded, his voice finally breaking. "All I wanted was my rightful place in the company, to be treated as an equal, not as your perpetual assistant." For an instant, I saw the child he once was in him and felt a pang of paternal pain. Teresa must have felt it too, because she squeezed my arm gently. "You should have talked to me like a man, face to face," I replied, my voice softer, but just as firm. "Not conspire behind my back, not threaten, and certainly not allow your mother to be hurt. That line once crossed has no return." With these words, I left the boardroom, escorting Teresa with the dignity that had always characterized us as a couple. Behind us, I heard the agents beginning the formal procedure with Jared and Danielle, their professional voices explaining the legal rights and obligations they now faced. The night was cool when we left the corporate building. The chauffeur was waiting for us with the door open. Teresa got in first, and before following her, I paused for a moment to contemplate the imposing skyscraper that housed the fruit of my life's work. For an instant, I felt the weight of the decisions made tonight. There was no turning back, and although justice had been served, there were no true winners in this family battle. "Are you okay?" Teresa asked when I sat down beside her in the back seat. "I will be," I replied, taking her hand carefully not to press her injured wrists. "And you?" "My heart aches for him," she confessed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Despite everything, he's still our son." "I know," I sighed deeply. "But some lessons are necessary, no matter how painful." During the drive home, we remained mostly silent, each processing the events of the last 48 hours, the betrayal, the confrontation, the inevitable rupture of what was once a united family. Upon arriving at our Georgetown residence, Teresa retired to rest while I headed to my study. I needed a moment alone, a space to breathe before facing the new day that would bring the arrival of Michael and Lauren, the press conference, the inevitable public scrutiny. I poured myself a glass of aged whiskey and walked over to the window. From there, I could see the garden that Teresa tended so carefully, now silver under the moonlight. So many memories in that space, the children running between the trees, family parties, quiet Sundays, reading under the shade of the old oak tree I planted when we bought this house. At what exact moment did everything go wrong? When did my son stop seeing me as a father and start seeing me as an obstacle? Was it gradual, or was there a breaking point I failed to identify? The sound of my phone interrupted my reflections. It was Michael calling from Seattle. "Pop, our flights are confirmed." Lauren and I will arrive tomorrow at noon, he informed me without preamble. Thank you for coming so quickly, I replied. How did the meeting go? He asked, the concern evident in his voice. Just as we planned, I responded. Jared and Danielle are now with the authorities, clearing up the matter of the falsified documents. And Mom, how is she taking it? She's hurting, as expected. He's her son, after all. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could imagine Michael, always the most thoughtful of my children, weighing his next words. Are you sure this is the right path, Pop? It's drastic. What would you have done, Michael, if someone hurt your mother in front of your eyes while your own brother allowed it? His answer was immediate. Exactly what you're doing. After hanging up, I contemplated the family photographs adorning one of the walls of my study. Frozen images of happier times, when the values I tried to instill in my children seemed to have taken deep root. One in particular caught my attention. Jared, about 12 years old, smiling proudly next to me after winning a school chess tournament. Just like you taught me, Pop, he had said that day. Plan several moves ahead and never underestimate your opponent. Ironic that those same lessons had turned against him now. My reflection was interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps. Teresa appeared in the study doorway, wrapped in her blue silk robe. I thought you'd be resting, I said, surprised to see her. I couldn't sleep, she replied, approaching. Too many thoughts. She sat on the sofa next to my armchair, her eyes scanning the same photographs I had been contemplating. Do you remember when we took that one? She asked, pointing to an image where the 5 of us posed in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Our 15th wedding anniversary, I replied with a melancholic smile. Lauren was afraid to climb to the top, and Jared held her hand the whole way, encouraging her with every step, Teresa completed. He was always a good big brother. The contrast between that protective child and the man he had become was painful. Where did we go wrong with him, Nate? Teresa asked, verbalizing the question that tormented me. I'm not sure it was a specific mistake, I replied after a moment of reflection. Perhaps it was a combination of factors. My constant demanding nature, the inevitable comparison with his siblings, his own insecurity, and then Danielle, catalyzing all of it. Do you think she manipulated him from the beginning? I'm convinced, I affirmed. I saw the ambition in her eyes the first time he brought her home. It wasn't love she was seeking, but position, power, access to our world. Teresa was silent for a moment before asking the question I knew would eventually arise. Is there no possibility of reconciliation, of giving him a second chance? I sighed deeply. This was the crossroads that tore me apart as a father. The steely determination to seek justice versus the natural instinct to forgive a son. I don't know, Teresa. What he did, allowing you to be hurt, crosses a line I never thought he'd dare to cross. People make mistakes, Nate, even terrible mistakes. There are mistakes, and there are conscious choices, I replied. He chose. Now, he must live with those consequences for a time. That means there could eventually be a way back, she insisted, hope slightly coloring her voice. I didn't have the heart to crush that hope, although my instinct told me that some fractures are too deep to fully heal. Time will tell, I finally replied. For now, he must learn his lesson. He must understand that respect isn't demanded with threats. It's earned with integrity. Teresa nodded slowly, accepting my answer, even if it wasn't what her maternal heart longed to hear. Michael and Lauren arrive tomorrow, I commented, slightly changing the subject. It will be good to have the house full again, even if it's under these circumstances. Yes, it will, she agreed with a small smile. It's been too long since we've had both of them under the same roof. We stayed in silence for a moment, the weight of the day's events finally taking a toll on our energy. We should try to sleep, I suggested, standing up and offering her my hand. Tomorrow will be another difficult day. Teresa took my hand and stood up, but instead of heading toward the door, she hugged me tightly. I felt her body tremble slightly against mine. "Thank you for always defending me," she whispered against my chest, "and for putting our dignity above everything." I held her carefully, conscious of her injured wrists, feeling how her gratitude partially eased the burden of the decisions made. In that silent embrace, I confirmed what I had always known, that any sacrifice, any battle, was worth it to protect this woman who had been my companion, my support, my moral compass for over 3 decades. "Always," I simply replied. As we climbed the stairs to our room, I thought about tomorrow, about the steps that still remained in this painful process, the press conference, the explanations to business partners, the inevitable public scrutiny. But I also thought about the opportunity that presented itself to rebuild on more solid foundations, to strengthen the bonds with Michael and Lauren, to honor the true meaning of family beyond blood ties. The path would be difficult, no doubt. The wounds inflicted would not heal overnight, neither for Teresa nor for me. Jared's absence at our family table would leave a void impossible to ignore. But as I had learned over 6 decades of life, sometimes the greatest act of love is to establish clear boundaries, even when doing so breaks our hearts. The dawn arrived with that particular luminosity of the mid-Atlantic, filtering through the curtains of our bedroom. It found me already awake, staring at the ceiling with my eyes wide open after a night of intermittent sleep. Beside me, Teresa was finally sleeping, her quiet breathing contrasting with the storm that still raged within me. Rose, our housekeeper of 20 years, was surprised to find me making coffee in the kitchen when I went downstairs. "Mr. Sterling, I can do that," she offered, approaching with that respectful familiarity that characterized our relationship. "It's fine, Rose. I needed to occupy my hands with something." She looked at me with that wisdom that only people who have faithfully served a family for so long that they become part of it possess. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Sterling?" "Of course." "Is what they're saying true? That young Mr. Jared won't be coming around anymore?" The news had traveled fast, as it always does. Service personnel have their own information networks, sometimes more efficient than any news agency. "It's complicated, Rose. Jared made some wrong decisions." She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. "I never liked that woman he brought into the house," she confessed in a low voice. "She has eyes that don't smile when her mouth does." Her simple but accurate description of Danielle brought a sad smile to my face. After breakfast, I received a call from Hector, my attorney. "Jared and Danielle were released last night after giving their statements," he informed me. "As we expected, the case of the falsified documents is complex. They admitted to obtaining them from a former employee in your financial department, but they deny having known they were altered. So they'll go unpunished?" I asked, frustration evident in my voice. "For the document issue, well, probably. But the complaint for assault against Teresa is moving forward. And of course, all the other consequences we already implemented remain firm." The house came alive with the arrival of Lauren, always a whirlwind of energy and words. At 36, she had inherited Teresa's determination and my pragmatism, combining them into a magnetic personality that had made her a natural leader. "Mom," she exclaimed upon seeing Teresa, hugging her tightly, before noticing the marks on her wrists. Her expression immediately hardened. "I can't believe Jared allowed this. I never would have imagined it from him." "People change, honey," Teresa replied softly. "Sometimes for the worse." "It's that woman," Lauren asserted with conviction. "Since she appeared, Jared has been gradually changing." Michael arrived shortly after with that air of serenity that had always characterized him. Unlike Lauren, he processed emotions internally before expressing them. His hug was prolonged, communicating his support without words. During lunch, we deliberately kept the conversation on neutral topics. It was only when Rose cleared the dessert dishes that we finally addressed the pending matter. "The press conference is at 3, I began, checking my watch. "We need to leave in 40 minutes. "Exactly what will be announced?" Michael asked, always attentive to details. "The restructuring of the Sterling Group into 5 separate entities, the creation of a foundation that will manage approximately 20% of the total assets, and, of course, the changes in executive management." "Will you mention Jared directly?" Lauren inquired. "Yes, but with tact. We will say that he has decided to pursue other professional interests, and that the separation was by mutual agreement." "That's more mercy than he deserves," Lauren commented, the indignation still evident in her voice. "We're not doing it for him," Teresa explained. "We're doing it for us, for the dignity of this family." Michael, who had remained pensive, finally spoke. "Have you considered that this might not be the end?" Knowing Jared, and especially Danielle, it's possible they might try to retaliate in some way. "I have considered it," I confirmed. "That's why the restructuring was so swift and complete." The sound of the doorbell interrupted our conversation. Rose appeared moments later in the dining room doorway, her expression hesitant. "Mr. Sterling, young Mr. Jared is here," she offered. "He insists on speaking with you before the press conference." A tense silence fell over the table. I exchanged glances with Teresa, seeing in her eyes a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Is he alone?" I finally asked. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Danielle did not come with him." After a moment of consideration, I nodded. "Show him into the study. I'll be there in a moment." When we opened the door, we found Jared standing by the window, contemplating the garden. He looked different. Tired, disheveled, with a shadow of a beard he normally would never have allowed in his always impeccable appearance. "Mom, Pop," he greeted in a hoarse voice, "thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Jared?" I asked directly, keeping my tone neutral. He began, but his voice broke. He took a deep breath before continuing. "I came to ask for your forgiveness, especially yours, Mom. What we allowed to happen, what Danielle did, is unforgivable." Teresa took a step forward, her expression softening slightly. "And Danielle? Where is she now?" "I don't know," he replied. And the surprise must have shown on our faces, because he quickly added, "I broke up with her last night. After they released us, we had a terrible argument. I finally saw what you saw from the beginning. Her excessive ambition, her lack of scruples, how she had been manipulating me. You expect us to believe that you suddenly had this epiphany?" I questioned, skeptical. "Just when you've lost all your access to the family empire?" "I don't expect you to believe me immediately," he replied with unusual humility. "I know words mean nothing after what I did. I only ask for the opportunity to prove it with actions, with time." Teresa looked at me, and I could read in her eyes the hope that this was genuine. "What exactly do you propose, Jared?" "I'm not asking you to reverse anything you've done," he clarified, surprising me. "The dismissal, the disinheritance, even the eviction. I accept them as fair consequences of my actions. I just ask that you allow me the opportunity to eventually rebuild our family relationship." "Why now, Jared? Why right before the press conference?" "Because I didn't want you to announce something irreversible without at least trying to talk to you first," he replied. "I know you're making the restructuring and my separation from the group official today. I'm not here to stop it. I'm here because after a night facing the reality of my actions, I understood what I truly lost. And it's not the properties or the money." Teresa approached him and took his hand. "What really happened last night with Danielle, son?" When we got back to the house, after giving our statements, She immediately started planning how to counterattack, how to destroy you, he explained. She talked about leaking personal information to the press, filing frivolous lawsuits, even falsely accusing you of abuse, Mom. Teresa paled at the latter. It was like a blindfold fell from my eyes. I suddenly saw clearly what I had become, what I had allowed. I told her it was enough, that I wouldn't participate in any more attacks against my family. She mocked me, saying I was weak, that I never deserved the sterling empire. And she simply left, he concluded, not before threatening to take revenge on me too. She said I would regret choosing you over her. Something in the bitterness with which he repeated those words made me think he might be telling the truth. The press conference will proceed as planned, I finally declared. The group's restructuring is a fact, as is your separation from all family businesses. The eviction from the Colorama property also stands. Jared nodded, accepting these conditions without protest. As for family reconciliation, I continued, carefully choosing my words, that will take time, a long time, and it will depend entirely on your actions, not your words. I understand, he replied with humility. May I ask what exactly you expect of me? Show us that you have truly changed. Teresa replied. Build something for yourself without using the sterling name as a stepping stone. Live by the values we tried to instill in you, and perhaps with time, we can rebuild the trust that was broken. The ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was packed with journalists and key figures from the American real estate sector. From the podium, with Michael and Lauren flanking me and Teresa seated in the front row, I formally announced the restructuring of the Sterling Group and the changes in executive management. As we had agreed, I mentioned Jared's departure respectfully, attributing it to differences in strategic vision. There was no mention of family conflicts, falsified documents, or physical assaults. The real surprise for the media was the announcement of the foundation, which would dedicate substantial resources to social housing and community development projects in underserved areas. When the question and answer session ended, I noticed a familiar figure at the back of the room. Jared had attended discreetly, without drawing attention, observing the event from afar. Our eyes met briefly before he gave a slight nod and left. The following months brought significant changes for everyone. Michael returned to Seattle, but with a commitment to visit D.C. more frequently. Lauren divided her time between Atlanta and D.C., becoming actively involved in the new foundation. Teresa and I found a new rhythm in our lives. With the group's restructuring complete, I gradually reduced my executive participation, dedicating more time to mentoring young entrepreneurs. As for Jared, he kept his word in an unexpected way. He found a modest apartment in the Columbia Heights neighborhood, and rejecting offers from competing companies, started a small real estate consulting venture for minor investors. The first family encounters were uncomfortable, charged with unresolved tension, but gradually, visit after visit, a new dynamic began to rebuild. Danielle, as we had anticipated, tried to fulfill her threats. She leaked some sensational stories to the tabloid press, but without substantial evidence, they were soon forgotten. The assault complaint proceeded legally, eventually resulting in a restraining order. 1 year after that fateful afternoon, we celebrated Teresa's 59th birthday with a small family gathering in the garden. Michael had flown in from Seattle with his new girlfriend. Lauren had brought her partner, and Jared, after consulting with everyone, attended alone. As I served champagne for the toast, I observed my family gathered under the oak tree, different, transformed by the crisis we had gone through, but somehow more authentic in our interactions. I wanted to propose a toast, I announced, raising my glass. To Teresa, the heart of this family, whose strength and compassion have guided us through the darkest moments. And also, I added, looking directly at Jared, to second chances, which are never guaranteed, but are always valuable when earned honestly. I saw my youngest son's eyes slightly moisten as he nodded in silent acknowledgement. Later, as Teresa and I walked through the garden, she stopped by the rose bush she had planted when we bought this house. "Do you know what I have learned from all this, Nate?" she asked, contemplating the flowers that had survived decades. "What, my love?" "That respect, like these roses, requires constant care. It's not enough to plant it once and expect it to flourish forever. It needs attention, clear boundaries, and sometimes severe pruning so it grows back stronger. And also," she continued, taking my hand, "that it's never too late to heal, even if the scars remain." I looked at our intertwined hands, hers smaller but equally strong in its delicacy. The marks on her wrists had disappeared long ago, but the memory remained, not as an open wound, but as a lesson learned at a high cost. "I love you, Teresa," I said simply, "for your wisdom, your strength, your ability to forgive without forgetting." "And I love you, my stubborn old man," she replied with that smile that had illuminated my days for over 3 decades, for always defending what's right, even when it's painful. And that night, lying next to Teresa, I thought about the question that had tormented me for the past year. Had I done the right thing? I didn't have a definitive answer. I probably never would. The only certainty was that I had acted to protect the most valuable thing in my life: my wife's dignity, our family's integrity, the values we had tried to pass on to our children. In the business world, they had called me ruthless, calculating, even implacable when necessary. But those who truly knew me knew that those qualities were always at the service of protecting what I loved. And when my own son held me down to allow my wife to be hurt, he discovered exactly how far I was willing to go to serve justice. It wasn't a story with perfect endings, as few in real life are. It was a story of mistakes and consequences, of wounds and slow healing, of losses and patient rebuilding. But above all, it was a story that confirmed what I had always believed: that respect is not demanded with threats or maintained with fear. True respect is earned with integrity and preserved with consistent actions. Day after day, year after year. So that's where my story stands today. When all the dust settled, when the lawyers packed their briefcases, and the press finally went home, I realized the lesson wasn't about winning the battle, but about drawing an absolute line in the sand. You can build an empire out of concrete and glass, but a family's foundation is built on something much softer and much stronger: mutual respect and an unbreakable commitment. And if someone, anyone, violates that fundamental trust, especially by harming the person you swore to protect, you have to respond. You respond not with blind fury, but with cold, calculated justice. Because sometimes, the only way to teach someone the value of integrity is by showing them the true cost of betrayal. It's hard, messy work, but it is necessary. Teresa and I, we're stronger now, anchored by those who stayed true. Remember this, friends. The greatest legacy we leave isn't what we own, but the boundaries we courageously defend. I hope you never face such a test, but if you do, choose honor, and always know that tomorrow brings a chance for true rebuilding. We look forward, stronger than ever. If you agree with me and liked my story, Show it by sending a like to the video. Let's see our numbers. I'm curious, from which city and at what time are you listening to me? Write it in the comments. If you'd like to support me on my journey, you can send me a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your valuable time with me. For more life stories like this, you can check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, there are 2 new life stories that I'm sure will interest you. Click 1 to start listening right away. Regards.